As the chains bit into my wrists, I never imagined that this captivity would force me to uncover a queen's secrets and my own heart. Ethan awoke to a soft hum vibrating through the floor beneath him, the kind of hum that felt almost alive, like the ship itself was breathing in low, deliberate pulses. His arms were chained above his head to a smooth metallic column, the kind that gleamed under the ambient violet light leaking from the walls. He rolled his eyes, trying to remember exactly which of his life choices had led him here, and landed squarely on the decision to join a friendly diplomatic mission to the Aurelia, a ship whose reputation for interstellar hospitality was, in hindsight, wildly exaggerated. "Good morning, human," a voice said, rich and melodic, yet laced with a sharp undertone that could slice a neutron star in half. Ethan squinted, shielding his eyes from the shimmering entranceway as the figure approached. The alien queen was everything the stories promised, and nothing he could have prepared for. Her skin was pale and almost translucent, catching the violet light so that she seemed like she was composed of liquid moonlight. Long, delicate ears extended upward from the sides of her head, twitching slightly as though adjusting to the vibrations of his nervous heartbeat. Her silver hair trailed down her back in a cascade that defied gravity, catching the light at impossible angles, and her eyes, bright, reflective, and infinitely knowing, studied him with what he could only describe as an amused intensity. "You're awake," she said, her voice low and firm, but with a softness that made the hairs on his forearms stand on end. "We will begin your education." Ethan coughed, tried to shift his hands, and ended up bumping the column instead, sending a small spark arcing along the metal. "Education, huh? Is this the human equivalent of a pop quiz, or are we talking full-on medieval-style torture?" The queen's lips twitched, just enough to suggest she was suppressing a smile. "You are human. Your species finds humor in precarious situations. We will explore this curiosity of yours." Hovering around him, small drones zipped past, leaving trails of phosphorescent light in their wake. One collided with a hovering tea set and sent a tiny silver cup spinning past Ethan's ear. "Heads up!" he shouted, swiping at it with a chained hand, missing by a mile and managing to knock himself against the column again. "Careful," Lysara said, stepping closer. "You might disrupt the balance of the chamber." Ethan snorted. "Disrupt the balance? Lady, I'm practically the embodiment of chaos already. You think I'm going to manage gravity grids too?" She tilted her head, letting the light catch in her hair and making it shimmer in a way that was both hypnotic and slightly terrifying. "Your confidence is amusing, but misplaced." The chamber itself was a marvel of alien architecture. Walls were not walls, but shifting panels that displayed holographic renderings of distant galaxies, floating stars, and swirling nebulae. Energy conduits crisscrossed the ceiling like glowing vines, pulsing softly with every movement of the ship. Plants, tall, translucent fronds that seemed to hum faintly when touched, bent in response to her presence. Ethan had to admit, if he were ever to be executed, it would be in the most visually stunning room imaginable. "I hope you enjoy the scenery," he muttered under his breath. "Do not speak without permission," Lysara said, though the sharp edge of her words was softened by a hint of amusement. "And yet, your first lesson will be obedience and observation." She gestured, and the column shifted slightly, releasing a soft chime as a holographic projection appeared. Ethan blinked, and suddenly the chamber was filled with countless simulations of human history, wars, dances, diplomatic blunders, and strangely, cats knocking things off tables in zero gravity. "Observe closely," Lysara said. "History informs behavior, but humor informs resilience." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Are you seriously telling me my survival depends on watching holographic cats?" "They are instructive," she replied, eyes narrowing just enough to suggest she was challenging his sarcasm. Hours, or what Ethan assumed were hours, since the chamber seemed to bend time itself, passed in a mix of instruction and what could only be described as high-stakes cosmic slapstick. At one point, Ethan tripped over a hovering platform and ended up spinning in zero gravity, his arms flailing as Lysara's long ears twitched in an expression that was almost human. "You humans are quite clumsy," she said, a hint of laughter finally breaking through her regal composure. "Clumsy, sure," Ethan said, attempting to grab a floating tool, only to send it careening into a wall of holographic stars. "I prefer gravitationally challenged." Her laughter was soft, musical, and utterly alien, vibrating in his chest like a subtle resonance. "You are amusing, Ethan." He nearly choked on the sound, more flustered than he wanted to admit. The absurdity of the situation, being chained and corrected by a queen whose beauty made his own eyes ache, was tempered by a growing realization. Lysara was unlike any being he had ever encountered. She was disciplined, precise, commanding, and yet something in her gaze suggested she was as intrigued by him as he was terrified of her. At one point, she moved closer, her silver hair brushing against the column, and whispered, "If you were single." Her words trailed off, and Ethan froze, eyes wide. The air in the chamber seemed to crackle with tension, but instead of fear, he felt a bizarre surge of humor. "Single, huh?" he said, straining against the chains with a wry grin. "That's convenient timing, Your Majesty." Her eyes flickered with what might have been amusement, or a very sophisticated alien version of disbelief. "Do not test me, human. Test you," he replied, rolling his eyes. "I'm chained to a column in a chamber full of floating teacups and cats that apparently teach history. I think I've already passed all the tests." The queen's lips curved, ever so slightly, into something that looked dangerously like a smile. Ethan couldn't tell if he should be terrified, thrilled, or just utterly bewildered. He decided on bewildered. The remainder of the session continued in this peculiar dance of authority, discipline, and humor. Ethan learned, mostly through trial, error, and the occasional insult disguised as advice, the alien customs of etiquette, combat readiness, and something called mental resonance alignment, which involved hovering in midair while attempting to mimic her subtle movements. Each failure elicited a small, amused sound from Lysara, and each small success earned him a nod that felt like a rare treasure. By the time the first cycle of lessons ended, Ethan's body ached from the chains and zero-gravity flips, his ego bruised from her exacting scrutiny, but his mind was strangely exhilarated. The queen, his tormentor, his instructor, and now, inexplicably, his confounding flirtation, had revealed a sliver of vulnerability in that single, half-joking, half-serious whisper about marriage. As the chains retracted just enough for him to slump to the floor, Ethan muttered, "Well, at least if I die here, I die knowing the queen thinks I'm potentially marriage material. Small victories, right?" Lysara's eyes narrowed, a faint twitch at the corner of her mouth betraying her amusement, though she said nothing. She merely gestured, and the floating tea set returned to order, the holographic cats vanished, and the chamber settled into quiet humming again. Ethan leaned back, taking in the strange majesty of the room, the alien technology, and the queen who had simultaneously terrified and intrigued him. Humor, he realized, might be the only thing keeping him sane, but somehow it also made him feel dangerously alive in a way he hadn't expected. And he suspected, with both dread and excitement, that Lysara was enjoying the game just as much as he was. Hours, or minutes, or perhaps an odd mixture of both. Later, he closed his eyes, letting the violet hum of the chamber lull him into a restless, anticipatory sleep. Somewhere between fear, humor, and fascination, Ethan knew that this was only the beginning, and that surviving the queen's lessons would require wit, nerve, and perhaps a little charm he hadn't realized he possessed. Ethan awoke to the familiar hum of the Aurelia beneath him, though this time, the chains that had restrained his wrists were replaced with a softer form of restraint. Shimmering energy cuffs that allowed him to move, but not entirely freely. The room smelled faintly of ozone and citrus, a combination that was now strangely comforting after the bizarre chaos of the previous cycle. Hovering drones flitted about like nervous fireflies, carrying small instruments and devices whose purpose Ethan could only guess at, and a few of them hovered close enough to watch him with blinking lights that felt almost like eyes. "Good morning," Lysara's voice cut through the hum, smooth, resonant, and entirely unamused by Ethan's slight yawn. She leaned against a column that seemed to shimmer in tune with her presence, her silver hair cascading in a gentle wave, ears flicking as if listening to some sublayer of sound he could not perceive. Today's lesson will be more interactive. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Interactive, huh? Last time interactive ended with me spinning in zero gravity like a failed satellite and nearly impaling myself on a hovering teacup. Her eyes narrowed in what he imagined was a sophisticated alien form of irritation. You survived. That was part of the lesson. He smirked. Barely. I would have preferred a lecture over becoming a human pinwheel. She tilted her head, the gesture almost feline, and for the first time Ethan noticed the delicate twitch of her long ears, subtle enough that he could only just perceive it. Your humor is persistent, she said. Perhaps it is a form of resilience. That was the first moment of true curiosity in him. This strict, commanding alien queen was studying his jokes as if they held some hidden meaning. Ethan swallowed the lump of dread in his throat and tried to make a joke that was half bravery, half stupidity. Or maybe it's just stupidity in motion. Works better in zero gravity. A faint, musical sound left her throat, almost laughter. You presume to categorize yourself. Intriguing. The next task involved moving through a series of gravity-shifting corridors. The Orlaya's interior was no static structure. Walls and floors could rotate, tilt, or even vanish to reveal voids of sparkling energy. Ethan's task was simple, theoretically. Navigate from one end to the chamber's control node while balancing on anti-grav panels that responded to weight and momentum. In practice, it meant that every step could launch him 5 meters across the room or into a floating display of alien artifacts. Careful, human, Lysara said from a hovering platform above him, arms crossed and eyes gleaming with amusement. The panels react to hesitation. Ethan swallowed hard, then quipped, Good to know hesitation is a death sentence. Noted. We'll try not to hesitate while panicking. A panel shifted beneath his feet, launching him forward like a poorly designed amusement ride. He flailed, arms catching a glowing energy conduit, which sent sparks drifting lazily around him. One particularly mischievous drone zipped past, and the sparks collided with it, leaving it buzzing and sputtering midair. Lysara raised an elegant hand, and the conduit sparks extinguished instantly. You are human, she said softly. Fragile, foolish, yet curiously persistent. Ethan grinned despite himself. Thank you, I think. Once he finally reached the control node, Lysara activated a series of holographic panels around him. Each displayed a different scenario. First, a diplomatic negotiation between her species and another alien civilization. Next, a sequence of combat maneuvers, and finally, a module called Personal Response Simulation. Ethan blinked. Personal Response Simulation? He asked. Sounds like a psychological torture chamber with a slightly fancy name. Observation, Lysara corrected. We will examine your reactions to varying emotional stimuli. The first stimulus was simple, a holographic projection of a fellow human in distress. Ethan responded instinctively, reaching out as though he could touch the projection, cursing the inadequacy of his species, fragile appendages in zero gravity. Lysara's ears twitched. Compassion is noted. The next module introduced humor. Small holographic figures enacted absurd situations, from alien bureaucrats slipping on anti-grav floors to floating cats knocking over perfectly balanced artifacts. Ethan's laughter rang out freely, echoing off the walls of the chamber. The Queen's eyes followed him closely, lips twitching as if to smile but refusing to commit fully. You find amusement in imbalance, she observed. Curious. Imbalance. That's my specialty, Ethan said, wobbling slightly on a shifting panel, catching himself with a hand on the wall. Part talent, part survival instinct. Mostly talent, though. Her gaze lingered on him longer than protocol would suggest, and for a moment, the commanding, untouchable aura of Lysara softened. Ethan noticed the subtle inflection of her voice, the way her ears twitched almost imperceptibly, and realized he might be witnessing something rare, a personal, almost human reaction from a being whose culture demanded control and precision above all else. The final module was the most unnerving. Lysara herself appeared, holographically, standing close enough that Ethan could see the curve of her lips and the faint gleam in her eyes. She spoke in soft tones that were almost conspiratorial. "If you were single," Ethan froze, mid-step, the words hitting him like a shockwave in zero gravity. His mind raced, and yet he couldn't help a nervous laugh. "Single, huh? That's convenient timing, Your Majesty." Her expression was unreadable, the faintest hint of something amusement, curiosity, playing across her features. "Do not presume familiarity," she said, though her tone betrayed just a fraction of hesitation. "Oh, don't worry," Ethan said, trying to mask the sudden, unsteady flutter in his chest. "I'm quite familiar with presumption. I specialize in it. It's how humans survive cosmic misunderstandings and accidental space diplomacy." Her eyes glimmered with what he could only describe as faint amusement, and for the first time, Ethan felt the absurdity of his situation. Chained, lectured, and yet utterly enchanted by the being who held him in her sphere of authority. The rest of the lesson unfolded in a strange dance of discipline and jest. He stumbled through anti-grav exercises, misinterpreted her hand signals in combat simulations, and accidentally triggered a holographic projection of herself, gesturing sternly, which only made him flail further. Each failure elicited a soft, almost musical laugh from her, breaking the rigid formality of the chamber. "You humans are persistent in your mistakes," she observed, her ears flicking with subtle emphasis. "And yet you endure." "I endure because someone has to keep this whole space opera interesting," Ethan quipped, sprawled across a shifting floor panel. "Otherwise, I'd just nap and call it a day." The Queen's eyes sparkled at that, a fleeting crack in her perfect composure. "Do not mistake humor for irreverence. You are observing, learning, adapting. That is acceptable." By the end of the cycle, Ethan was exhausted, tangled in zero-gravity drifts and laughter, his muscles sore but his mind strangely alert. Lysara floated above him, arms crossed, her expression softened from the strict severity he had initially feared. "Tomorrow," she said, voice low and commanding, "we continue. Your progress is acceptable, human, but do not grow complacent." Ethan chuckled, brushing strands of silver hair from his eyes as he rolled onto a stable platform. "Complacent me? Never. I'm a disaster in motion, and apparently that counts as resilience." Her lips quirked, almost imperceptibly. Indeed. As the chamber settled into its quiet hum once more, Ethan realized that the Queen's single, half-joking confession had changed something. Humor, which had always been his shield, was now a bridge, a fragile, unspoken link that allowed him to navigate the tension of discipline, curiosity, and the strange, electric pull he felt toward Lysara. The night, or whatever passed for night aboard the Aurelia, stretched ahead, filled with uncertainty, lessons, and, surprisingly, the faint thrill of connection. He closed his eyes, letting the soft violet light and the faint scent of ozone lull him into restless anticipation, certain that the Queen's words, and the humor that tethered him to sanity, would echo in his mind through the next cycle of instruction. And somewhere deep in his chest, an unfamiliar warmth flickered, fueled by curiosity, absurdity, and the inexplicable pull of a queen who might, in some improbable twist of fate, find him worthy of more than just lessons and corrections. Ethan stirred as the soft hum of the Aurelia filled the chamber once again, but this time the vibration felt different, less menacing, more like a heartbeat he could synchronize with. The energy cuffs had been removed entirely overnight, leaving him unrestrained for the first time since his arrival. He stretched, testing his limbs, and found himself grinning despite a lingering soreness that stretched from his shoulders to his toes. The Queen's lessons had pushed him to the edge of exhaustion, but somehow, through the chaos, missteps, and bizarre humor-laden drills, he felt sharper, more present, and surprisingly capable. "Rise, human," Lysara's voice cut through the violet glow of the chamber. She leaned against a column, arms crossed, hair floating slightly as if defying the artificial gravity around them. Her long ears twitched in a rhythm that Ethan had come to recognize as amusement, or perhaps curiosity. "Today, your final assessment awaits." Ethan blinked. Final assessment. After the past few days, I was hoping for a nap and maybe a medal for surviving your floating cats of doom. Her lips curved into the faintest smirk. You persist in humor. That is notable. The assessment is practical. Your adaptability, comprehension of our culture, and social nuances will be examined. Social nuances, huh? Does that involve pretending to understand alien etiquette while internally screaming? Ethan asked, raising one brow. Partially, Lysara replied, eyes glimmering. But it also involves subtle negotiation, observation, and restraint. You may find it enlightening. Ethan's grin was half confident, half nervous. At least this time he wasn't spinning in zero gravity like a human pinwheel. Small victories counted. The chamber shifted again, walls becoming transparent and revealing the swirling violet clouds of the gas giant below. Panels of alien technology hovered midair, projecting holographic scenarios that required rapid decision-making. One scenario depicted a diplomatic crisis with a neighboring species. Another tested combat and evasive maneuvers against energy constructs. A final simulation presented an ethical dilemma, a choice between saving a group of alien scientists or a human contingent. Ethan moved through the scenarios with a mixture of calculated thought and instinctive improvisation. When the holographic constructs malfunctioned mid-maneuver, spinning and bouncing like cosmic pinballs, he laughed, dodged, and even managed to knock a floating teacup into a precise alignment that Lysara had failed to anticipate. You adapt with creativity, she said, eyes narrowing as though evaluating his every movement. And humor again. Well, Ethan said, catching himself on a shifting anti-grav panel, if I survive without breaking anything besides my dignity, I consider it a win. The Queen's lips twitched, almost a smile. Your sense of humor is resilient. It is one of the few traits that allowed you to endure this regimen. Then came the personal test. A projection of Lysara appeared in front of him. Close, impossibly lifelike, each detail so precise that he could see the faintest pulse in her neck, the glimmer of silver in her eyes, the delicate twitch of her long ears. Ethan, she said softly, your behavior indicates growth, yet understanding of emotion, connection, and authority must be proven. Ethan swallowed. He had navigated zero-gravity chaos, cultural lessons, and almost every conceivable human misstep in the chamber. But the way her eyes seemed to search his soul was something no simulation could prepare him for. Prove it how? He asked, attempting a casual shrug while his chest pounded. Through honesty and choice, she said. Your final exercise is simple. Decide your position between duty and personal connection, knowing it will influence the outcome of your role aboard this ship. Ethan stared at her, the words hanging like stars suspended in the violet chamber. It wasn't a trap. It wasn't a puzzle. It was trust, or at least a test of courage. He realized then how much he had grown, not physically or in skill alone, but in understanding. He had learned to navigate not only alien rules, but the fragile, unpredictable terrain of emotion itself. Humor had been his shield, yes, but also his bridge, and he now grasped its power in ways he hadn't anticipated. I choose both, he said finally, voice firm. I respect the hierarchy, the rules, and your authority, but I also acknowledge the connection between us. Lysara's expression softened, the rigid control giving way to a subtle warmth. Interesting, she said, a faint smile brushing her lips. Few humans recognize that balance. Few would dare admit it under scrutiny. The chamber shifted one last time, the holographic scenarios dissolving into streams of light that twirled like dancing nebulae. Drones settled into orderly patterns, and the room hummed with calm. Lysara floated closer, her silver hair drifting like liquid in microgravity, and studied him with a quiet intensity that made his pulse quicken. You have changed, she said. You have learned to navigate not only my culture, but the complexities of interaction between our species. Humor, persistence, and insight, these qualities have earned you my respect. Ethan grinned, half in relief and half in nervous anticipation. Does this mean I get a medal, or at least a floating teacup that doesn't try to assassinate me? Her laughter, soft and musical, echoed through the chamber. Perhaps a commendation in the form of continued proximity, if you can endure it. He chuckled, feeling a warmth that had little to do with humor alone. The queen had revealed her vulnerability in small, deliberate doses. Her near whisper about marriage, her rare smiles, the faint amusement in her gaze, and he had responded honestly, without sarcasm hiding fear. He felt for the first time that he wasn't just surviving lessons or tests. He was participating in a relationship that balanced curiosity, respect, and attraction, delicate as it was. "You will remain aboard the Aurelia," Lysara said finally, "not merely as a guest, but as a participant in ongoing missions with privileges and responsibilities." "Privileges?" Ethan asked, raising one brow. "Observation, interaction, and influence," she said, ears twitching slightly. "And continued study of humor in human species." "I see," Ethan said with mock gravity. "So basically I'm now your official human comedy consultant. I'll make sure interstellar negotiations are both productive and moderately amusing." Her lips curved in a full smile this time, and for a fleeting moment, she appeared entirely at ease. "You may find that your role involves more than amusement." The following cycles aboard the Aurelia were markedly different. Ethan moved through them with competence, grace, and a wry commentary that often drew a rare laugh from the queen. He navigated cultural simulations, diplomatic scenarios, and even minor combat drills with confidence, yet always kept a playful, irreverent spark. He had grown from the nervous, sarcastic human who stumbled into zero-gravity pinwheels to a capable, adaptable, and observant presence in the Aurelia's chambers. At night, he and Lysara would speak quietly amid the violet glow, sharing observations about alien culture, debating ethical dilemmas, and occasionally engaging in playful teasing over tea that floated in midair. Humor remained a bridge, attraction a subtle current, and respect an unshakable foundation. Through discipline, chaos, and the unlikely mixture of tension and laughter, Ethan realized he had changed fundamentally. He had learned to face authority without fear, to acknowledge attraction without weakness, and to wield humor as both shield and weapon. One evening, as the Aurelia drifted through the clouds of the gas giant, Ethan looked at Lysara, her long ears twitching as she studied a holographic map of distant stars, and smiled. "You know, I think I might actually like this life," he said, stretching across a stable platform, "even if it involves a queen with a questionable sense of humor supervising my every move." "You